And welcome back to our Holy Faith devotional series. And today we have a very special guest here with us, Mary Jane Zuzolo. Mary Jane, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So give us a little bit of background about yourself, who you are, and how you're connected to the Holy Faith devotion. This is a very interesting story here.
Okay. Well, let me just say it's too bad that virtue is not hereditary because Sister St. Pierre is my great aunt. Her oldest brother immigrated to America about the same time that she entered Carmel. And he settled in Vincennes, Indiana, if anyone knows where that's at. It's got a lot of history there. As far as I am concerned, I've been married for almost 28 years. Our anniversary is this Friday. Mike is my husband, and we have 5 children, a daughter, and 4 sons.
Excellent. Praise God. Praise God. And turns out you're related to the great Sister Mary of St. Peter.
That's right. Yes. We didn't know a lot about her growing up. That was before we discovered the handbooks or some of the longer biographies of her. My grandfather had some of those books in French, but we weren't aware of those, and so didn't know a lot about her growing up. But once my mom discovered the Golden Arrow, she got a copy for all of us, and we read that, and then later my husband found some of the longer biographies, and so that kind of started our journey with her.
Excellent. And you're her great niece, is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
That's excellent. Beautiful. So today you're going to tell us about the connection with the Holy Face and the story of Job in the Bible, which I never heard that was connected at all, but that sounds super interesting.
Well, yes, I credit Venerable DuPont for kind of alerting me to the idea that there might be prefiguring in the book of Job. He had 2 statements in the longer book about him pertaining to Job. He said that Job was the only person in the Bible whom God promised to hear his prayers. And he also said that we don't waste time in praying for others, that Job was saved when he prayed for his friends. And of course, I'm sure he was struck by the phrase in the book of Job that Job offered his face for his friends and to intercede for them.
Right. And Job is a type of Christ. Go ahead.
Yes, so that's just kind of something that got the ball rolling, and I think I don't know if you want me to give kind of an overview of the book of Job to bring the audience all to the same point here.
Sure.
Okay, sure. So Job is an endearing character in the Old Testament. Of course, we can all identify with the conundrum of innocent sufferings and the question it brings. And so the book of Job is mostly written in the form of didactic poetry to address this problem of why bad things happen to good people. Job has a lot of wealth and blessings, and he's very pious. And so this catches the attention of Satan, and he challenges God by telling God that surely if Job was stripped of these blessings, he would curse God to his face, he would blaspheme. So God grants Satan this challenge, and Job suffers the great deprivation. He loses his wealth and his children, they all die, his own health to leprosy, and he suffers the continually questioning of his friends that surely he must have done something wrong for all of this suffering to befall him. And also his wife tempts him by saying, just curse God and die, basically. so a large part of the book is this debate between Job and his friends, because Job is trying to defend his innocence and also attest to the justice of God, while his friends are insisting that he must be guilty, because they sort of join sin with suffering, not unlike Satan joins prosperity to piety. And so Job, continues to defend himself, but he starts to complain a lot too, and complains more than he, talks about the goodness of God, to the point it's almost tantamount to accusing God of smiting an innocent man. God eventually appears in a storm cloud and says that, man cannot conceive of the wisdom and greatness of the Almighty. And so in suffering, he should bend humbly under the arm of his creator. And, he tells Job, you should be careful not, while defending yourself, not to, what I would say, criticize God, to judge him. And so Job realizes his mistake, and he does penance and, embraces humility. But God is, God's pleased with that, but he's not pleased with the friends. They have, quote, not spoken rightly before God. And so he, and their fault is that they are, sort of ignoring the truth of Job's innocence to fit their narrative. And so he tells the friends that they must ask Job to present his face to God in reparation instead of theirs, because, Job's face is more pleasing to God. And so I think you can already start to see some of how this might be prefiguring of the Holy Face devotion, because in the Holy Face devotion, we are offering the wounded countenance of Christ to the Father in reparation for sins against the first three commandments. Christ's face is infinitely more pleasing to God, just as Job's face was more pleasing to God than his friends. And so, we're using the merits of Christ's face, the merits of Christ, the love of Christ. That's what we're offering. So there's three lessons in the book that really pertain to what we are making reparation for in the Holy Face devotion. There's, the book is replete with lessons, and a lot of it has to do with helping the notion of the Old Testament idea that sin and punishment are always connected. It's not necessarily that way throughout the Old Testament, but there are times where that surfaces. But for the purpose of the devotion, the lessons are, and these will sound a lot like what we encounter today with modernism and relativism. We don't get to make up our own truth. So like the friends of Job, they were in essence creating their own truth by ignoring the truth of Job's innocence. We also don't get to decide our own morality. Job was sort of trying to transfer his notions of right and wrong that have been given to us onto God, but God is the highest standard of justice. We don't get to decide what is right behavior of God, and we don't get to decide what's right behavior of us. God has given us those moral laws to follow. Again, these are lessons that could be learned today in light of modernism and relativism, where people are trying to create their own truths. They're trying to create their own morality, and in a sense, making themselves little gods. Traditionally, there's kind of two schools of thought as far as the prefiguring goes, and they're very closely related. They're like two sides of the same coin. I know that Gregory the Great, he talked about Job's face being offered in reparation was similar to the church's prayers being offered for heretics. Heretics sort of impugn the faith of the church, not unlike Job's friends were calling into question the morality of Job. And the other notion is probably what we can all guess, that the face of Job being offered in reparation can signify the innocent atoning of sin of Christ in the great redemption. And there again, Christ is the injured party. It's with the Holy Face devotion, if in fact that is being prefigured as well, the face of Job being offered in reparation, of course, matches with us offering Christ's face in reparation for the salvation of our brethren. So in a sense, we're like Job, and we're like the friends. We're like Job because we're praying for others. When we're like the friends because we're not worthy to offer our own face, but we need to offer the face of Christ. And there's kind of one more little observation at this point that makes it all the more interesting, and that is that in the Revelations, Christ revealed to Sister St. Pierre. We call her that. I think she was called that in Carmel because there were so many Sister Marys of such and such. And so anyway, just not to confuse people, Sister Mary of St. Peter is what probably most people call her. But anyway, he revealed to her that the face of Christ represents three aspects of, I guess you could say, the divinity. Obviously, the wounded countenance that we use in the Holy Face devotion, the veil of the Veronica image, which is behind me, that's indicative of the wounded face of Christ, wounded for our offenses in the great redemption. And then, kind of echoing back to the interpretation that Gregory the Great had, the face of Christ also represents the church, and specifically the doctrine of the church. And notice that, again, those are the two injured parties, respective of those interpretations. The third thing that is revealed in the devotion that the Holy Face represents is the Godhead itself. And today we are injuring the Godhead. That is the wounded party. Christ tells us that our sins of blasphemy renew the wounds to his face. And this is an important part of the devotion. That's why we don't use like a resurrected face. And even, the beautiful devotion of St. Pierre is a little bit different. Using the Shroud of Turin, that is a deceased face, just at the moment of resurrection, perhaps. So, that's probably a subject for another time. But I think that is a good stopping point for this part. Although the actual storyline, which if we have time and you don't mind, we can go into that. Kind of each event in Job's life also represents an aspect of the devotion.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, great. And I guess one of the reasons I thought of this as a possible topic is because your other guests did such a good job with not just giving a broad overview, but some deep insights to the devotion. And I thought that I would like to do that too, but I was trying to think of a different way. And this, I guess I should explain, I am trying to write a book on the Holy Face devotion. And so this is one of the things that I hope to include to kind of tie different chapters together. So anyway, the first part of the storyline is that Satan wants to tempt Job to blaspheme. And, in modern culture, we would think, why, of all the horrific sins that Satan could hope to induce Job to make, why would he choose blasphemy? Well, Satan knows what we forget, that blasphemy wounds the heart of Christ more than any other sin. That is told to us in the Revelations. And, it's Saint Ligori referred to it as the deadliest sin. It's attacking God openly, and it's the opposite of fear of the Lord. It's kind of the hallmark sin of Satan. You can't have fear of the Lord without humility. And so the opposite of that, of course, is pride. The culture now is so familiar with the sin. We've been desensitized to it, and of course, it extends to the first three commandments. Obviously, blasphemy. That's the second commandment. But when we don't observe the Lord's Day, we're taking from the Lord the proper respect due to His holy name. And the same with the first commandment. If we don't believe in God or hold something else above God, we're taking from the holy name of God its proper reverence and majesty. So there is another kind of interesting example of the power of the name of God properly reverenced. And probably most of you are familiar with the story of The Exorcist. I never had the courage to watch that movie, but basically, there was a young boy in real life. I think the movie had a girl, but the boy was possessed, and these terrible utterances were coming from the boy that were the evil spirits, and they of course had all sorts of blasphemies and horrible abuses to the priest and his assistant. But then one day, instead of hearing these things, they heard the voice of Saint Michael, and Saint Michael said, basically he said the name of the Lord, that you are freed in the name of the Lord. I forget the exactly how it was worded, but he used the Latin Dominus. And prior to this, the voices had told the priest exorcist that there was only one word which could free the boy, and that he would never be allowed to say it. And so, this gives you an idea of how powerful the name of the Lord is when properly reverenced. And of course, it can help understand what a grave sin it is to not properly reverence it. Okay, and so another aspect of this kind of is the fact that the wife tempted Job by saying that he should just curse God and die. So I know Gregory the Great refers to the wife as a type of Eve, and I think she is also a type of modern culture, because again, we've just become so desensitized. It's like a collective sin. I guess kind of the analogy I wanted to draw is that there's an implication by her saying curse God and die, that to blaspheme is it does mean the death of the soul. And so this is important. Somehow, again, modern culture is sort of ignorant or willfully ignorant to the right order of things, that there's no life to the soul without proper reverence to God, proper fear of the Lord. There's no proper fear of the Lord without humility. And again, that's tied with the sin of blasphemy. So trying to think here. I guess just tied with this desensitivity is the fact that there have always been heresies and bad actors in the church or at large, but there's kind of before there was enough calling out on this, even within society and certainly within the church. And even if it was kind of a lone Athanasius or something like that, there was enough movement and momentum to set things straight. And thankfully, we do have some voices in the church now, but you can see that, and there's a lot of confusion, and it's sort of to the point where baddies aren't necessarily seen as bad. And, we're reminded of Isaiah when he says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good. So this is very prevalent, and it makes the devotion very relevant today. And so I guess the next thing that happens to Job is just the fact that Satan is kind of tied with his wife's temptation. Satan is allowed to tempt him. He's sort of unfettered, and all these calamities befall him. And it's hard not to think of the vision of Pope Leo XIII. He had exactly 33 years before the miracle of the sun at Fatima, and it was just not quite a year, can't remember exactly, before he approved the Archconfraternity of the Holy Face for the whole world. But of course, he had the vision that Satan was challenging God and said that, if you give me 100 years and more power over those who follow me, I can break your church. And even though God assured him that would never happen, he was determined. And after this vision, Pope Leo XIII, fell to the ground. And, when he was able to, he more or less immediately composed the St. Michael prayer, which was said for decades in the church after every Mass. So I think that we can think, like I mentioned, to Fatima, which talks about the apostasy of the faith, and this was something that Pope Leo XIII saw. There's also other Marian apparitions which refer to this apostasy, and Cardinal Mueller, he has referenced the silence among those who should not be silent, as sort of indicative of the great apostasy that might be the time of tribulation, which is mentioned in the Catechism. It's not some far out idea, and so anyway, these things are tied together. Akita, Japan, that apparition, it talks about the infiltration of these ideas of modernism into the church. And Quito, Ecuador, that was 400 years ago, but those nuns were asked to make reparation for our time. And, the list can go on and on, but again, this might be a subject for another time. Okay, the next analogy is the leprosy of Job. In the Revelations, Christ says that our sins against the first three commandments are, they cause sores on him, quote, like another Lazarus. So, leprosy type sores. And he, I guess, let me say one more thing about Job. His sores went from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And again, Gregory the Great had something to say about that. He said that represented the temptation of Satan, beginning with the laity and ending with the hierarchy. And so back to Christ, who says that, we wound him with our offenses like sores of Lazarus. He said that Lazarus had, compassionate dogs that would lick those sores. And he invited Sister Mary St. Peter, and therefore all of us, to offer him consolation. And then he gave her the golden arrow prayer. When she received this prayer, she also had a vision of, torrents of graces being poured out for sinners. And he said, you should be careful of how you appreciate this favor, because you will be held accountable. And so I think that is important for us to understand, that, God is expecting this of us. If we have been graced with the knowledge of this devotion, we have a real obligation to participate in the communion of the saints and help our brethren. And in fact, he, later says, woe to those cities, is what he's talking about at that time, who do not offer reparation. And I think your guest Quiva had touched on this too, that the converse then is at least true, and that is, if we do offer reparation, in our individual cities, that's going to help us in times of difficulty and tribulation. And so I think that that's important to remember. On to the next one. Job did offer penance, and he did so in a very humble fashion. And he prayed for his friends, and this kind of ties in with what Leo DuPont mentioned, that we are praying for the masses, and I know Sister St. Pierre was told that God just counts the just, but if the just disappear and don't offer this reparation, that's when his hand of justice will fall. So finally, well, I guess two more things. God, does accept the face of Job, and he's pleased. And again, I know that DuPont had mentioned at this point that God had promised to hear his prayers. And before I talk about how, Job was then rewarded twice. His previous possessions, he and his wife had more children, and he lived a happy old age. And God did choose to reward him in this life, even though he was, quote, free to do otherwise. So he, before I talk about the rewards that we have in the promises that God gives in the devotion, just kind of want to remind people of some of the amazing phrases that have been said about this devotion from Christ himself. He said that it was the most beautiful work under the sun. And of course, he does not mean to somehow trump the great redemption, but rather this is an extension of that. He is giving man a role to play in the salvation of his brethren. And it's, according to him, a necessary role. It's not an optional one. He said that this devotion was the sole means of appeasing his Father. I think that's really remarkable. And it's the greatest grace second to the sacraments. And he was speaking specifically about kind of the climax of the devotion as it was revealed was the wounded countenance of Christ, and he spoke a lot about Veronica's consoling him. And that offering of Christ's face to the Father in reparation is, and tie that with the kind of sensible object of devotion, which is the face. That is the greatest grace, second to the sacraments. And I remember when I first read that, I thought, oh dear, maybe at some point we'll be deprived of the sacraments, and of course that would surely be decades away. And then, of course, we went through COVID, and we might have more to go through. And so I think that for people to be able to cling to this kind of secondary source of grace is a wonderful blessing. And God did give us promises if we practice this devotion. And when we look at some of the other promises, like to the Rosary or the Sacred Heart, for example, they're centered a lot around personal salvation and temporal assistance. And the Holy Face devotion, it does have these, like we're promised final perseverance, and we are told that we can use the quote coin of Christ's face when offered to the Father to sort of obtain whatever blessings we are in need of. But he also promised these kind of outlandish things like marvels and, as in miracles, and the conversion of the masses, not just personal salvation, and things, heavenly favors like shining with splendor in heaven, and there's I guess a few more that I'm not thinking of right now, but I mean these are kind of so fantastic that a person may be tempted to think, oh, this was not meant to be literally true. We're not literally going to perform miracles. But then we had this great example of Venerable Leon Dupont, and I know that some of the other people who were interviewed kind of gave a nice overview of him. Basically, he's the other half of the devotion. He used his wealth and prestige to inform the public of it, but he had a wonderful witness to the devotion. He was very, very devout person. He's already venerable. But he performed thousands of miracles, and these, I know at least 6,000 were documented. Just amazing, and so much so that Pope Pius IX referred to him as, quote, perhaps the greatest miracle worker in church history. And I mean, again, this is just astounding that not more people know about this devotion. I sort of feel humbled because I don't think I would know about it had there not been the family connection. Maybe just now I would have heard a little bit about it perhaps, but and that is something that was said in the Revelations 2. Christ said, not only was it the most beautiful work under the sun, but that Satan would do everything in his power to stamp out the devotion. And that sort of indicates the spiritual significance, in the unfolding of spiritual things, if Satan was willing to give it that kind of attention. So anyway, I think that those are some of the main analogies. There's a lot more that can be said, but that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, that's great. That's really interesting. Are there any other? I guess I'm sure there's, like you said, there's a lot of little fun facts there that go along with any of that. Is there anything else that maybe the listener should be aware of, or anything that we should draw our attention to that maybe we often miss?
I think it's important. There's a lot of confusion maybe about the different faces, because I think we're all aware of the Veronica Vale image, and then the Shroud of Turin, and then kind of the resurrected face, the Veil of Montepello. And I just want to emphasize that this devotion is very tied to the Veronica Vale image. And there's lots of reasons for that. For one, that was the image that Leo Dupont used in performing all those miracles. That says a lot. I think miracles matter. Christ repeatedly talked about needing Veronicas to console him. And so, that's a big tie-in with Veronica's veil. And, when you think about Job was saved. I'm sorry, yeah, Job, he offered prayers while he was still suffering. And actually, according to the Revelations, since Christ is being wounded anew, we're offering these new wounds on his face to the Father, and they again are caused by sins against the first three commandments. And so there's so many other things I could go into about that, but I think that does seem to be a lot of confusion about that. So just in a nutshell, I wanted to mention at least that much. And I did think of a fun little anecdote about Job, because he kind of reminds me, I'm sorry, about Venerable Dupont, because he kind of reminds me in a lot of ways of Job. They had, this charm that flowed from their humility and reverence for God. Venerable Dupont, he was an extremely wealthy man, but he went through a lot of hardships, losing his family members, and also, he willingly gave up his wealth to help propagate the devotion. And he died not very wealthy at all. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But one thing that really struck me, there's a lot of anecdotes about him, but Sister St. Pierre had been told by God to ask Leo Dupont to pay for like a little pamphlet publication of some sort concerning the Little Gospel devotion. That's a different devotion that she had revealed to her. And Sister St. Pierre said, well, could I offer some recompense to him, even a blessing to his family? And God said, no, his love for me is so pure that he will do this without any recompense. And for his disinterestedness, I will reward him magnificently in heaven. And I just think that's a beautiful little anecdote, and kind of ties in with Job, because, Job did love God regardless of the misfortunes that befell him. And so they're both great examples, I guess, of what we should be.
That's great. And now you brought up St. Gregory the Great. Are there any other, making the connection between Job and the Holy Face, are there any other church fathers or saints that made any of those kind of connections?
Well, I know Pope St. John Paul II was one of the ones that really talked a lot about Job's face being offered, symbolizing the innocent atonement of sin by Christ. I know, I probably need to look into more examples. Gregory the Great has this huge 3-volume series on the Book of Job, and so I use that a lot. And but yeah, and there's not, as far as the new doctors of the church, maybe well, popes and doctors will say, I mentioned, I know that Pope John Paul II did have a great devotion to the Holy Face, probably more in line with the Saint Farina devotion. Padre Pio did. I guess the doctor of the church that comes to mind the most, and this is probably a subject for a whole interview, would be Saint Therese of Lisieux. And of course, I think maybe some others have mentioned that she was very devoted to the Holy Face, and so much so that she said that it was, quote, the source of all her piety. And she was talking specifically about the Holy Face devotion and the revelations. And she was a great admirer of Sister St. Pierre, and learned from her mystical experiences as well. So as far as Job goes, maybe I don't know of anyone off the top of my head that had more to say about the prefiguring, but I do think that it was on the minds of some of the recent popes and doctors.
Excellent. No, that's very helpful. And now, is there any links or resources or books or any of your information that you would recommend that our listeners get or watch? Any books, like you said, that commentary on Job from St. Gregory the Great, is that, I don't know if that's found on Amazon or if you just have to look that up on.
Yes, I think it was found on Amazon. I can get you that information. As far as people needing a Veronica Vale image, if I know, my website is holyfacedevotion.org. There's another wonderful website, holyfacedevotion.com, and they have images that you can just print off, and then you can have blessed, and you can put in your home. And so that's might be an important resource. I do hope maybe before the end of the summer to put on my website a page about where a person may obtain certain resources, or like the image, and maybe the cross and different things like that. So yes, I guess that's all I can think of at the moment. I would highly recommend the longer versions of the lives of both Sister St. Pierre and Venerable DuPont. Um, I I think that the Golden Arrow is beautiful, and it's a great overall introduction, and it does cover so much. But it could only be so long, and the other version is like 400 pages long, and there is a lot there, particularly surrounding the mystical experiences of Sister St. Pierre, which are just amazing. And one example comes to mind. Christ told her that he had taken on all the sins of the world, but that he was going to have her take on the sins of France. Pretty amazing. Now, she would use his merits to do that, and the prayers of the devotion. But that's just kind of mind-boggling. And there were a couple other things that she experienced that were really very interesting, and hope to maybe someday talk about those things too.
Excellent. Yes, we'd love to have you back to go into more detail about all these different connections for the Holy Face. So thank you very much, Mary Jane. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, we'll do it again. God bless.
Thank you. God bless.
Bye.
Goodbye.